just kind of seeing like how someone broke this, not even like coded it differently, but broke down the problem differently. And like that's all kind of coding really is, like break down the problem. You might break it down into different problems, and then we just go and solve that. And I think that's really where like diversity plays a hugely important part in something like coding. You know, it's not just because it's a male dominated field, and we need to get more diverse people into it. It's more just you literally are missing a whole other perspective on how to solve this problem.
Welcome to Queer Coded. My name is Eli.
My name's Emily. We do apologise if you can hear any music in the background. Seems everyone outside is having a great time, and we're not going to stop them. If you've not joined us before, we're just chatting to some members of the Northcoders team who are also part of the LGBTQIA community. It's just a nice relaxed chat just to see how they are, where they got into tech, and what they can see for the future. Today we have Maddie. Would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, Maddie?
Hi, I'm Maddie. I am a tutor here at Northcoders. I got into tech just last year. I decided to change my career. I have had a lifelong special interest in computers, and I'm also a computer science student as well.
Oh, fantastic.
Awesome.
What were you doing before this?
I was just working part-time as an admin. I had my son when I was 19 during university, so when he was young I just wanted to be around at home for him. So just worked the mornings for the Association of Colleges, which is a really nice organisation, and I liked working there, but it wasn't a career for me.
What got you into computer science as a degree? I feel like that's quite a big jump.
I did 2 degrees previously in philosophy. And when I was doing them, I really loved logic, and those were my highest marks by far, especially because they're more mathsy, so you actually get marked out of 100 instead of counting 85 with humanities. Yeah, so I was working part-time as an admin, so I obviously had quite a lot of free time, and then I found out about funding from Student Finance to do a second degree in a STEM subject. So I started studying with the Open University then, but then sort of towards the middle of the year, I grew a bit more frustrated with my job, and I found out about Northcoders, so I applied for a scholarship here, and then when I got the place, I left my job and came to do the course.
Awesome.
At the time, I was doing 2 modules at a time for uni, which was quite intense alongside the course, so I've now dropped down to just doing 1 at a time.
Yeah, it sounds full on.
Yeah.
A lot of respect for anyone who can have a child and also have a job and also study at the same time. That's a lot to do.
Yeah, I just don't like having free time, I think. So.
No, you don't want to sit down long enough.
No, I don't want to let my brain get idle and start thoughts. So.
Amazing. So in terms of your earlier life, what was your first kind of experience or interaction with tech?
I was given a old Windows 95 PC by my dad when I was little, and I just used to play little games on there and stuff at first. And I really got into the Pets series. And Pets was great at the time. It got quite a lot of young women into tech because the fan base was predominantly women. And we would make these things called hex pets, which was using hexadecimal code to kind of like create new pets for the game. And also little websites with HTML and stuff like that to kind of list the pets you've made, and other people could come and download them. So it was a nice little community to be in, yeah.
That's really cool.
It's really cool.
And I've never even heard of
No,
like that.
me either.
I'm a big fan of these games still to this day. It's something that I think is really missing as well. Like I'd love for there to be another kind of artificial intelligence pet kind of simulation game like that. Because both that game and Creatures were really ahead of their time with the AI that they used. They used things that are pretty similar to neural networks. So coming out of the 90s, it was pretty intense.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, part of the podcast, anyway, is talking about like our queer experiences. How do you feel like your queer identity has changed through your journey through tech?
For me, with my sexuality, I'm bisexual. I've been very comfortable with it from a very young age. I've been fortunate to have a lot of family support on that front, and it was just never treated like an issue. It was totally normalised from the age that I had a crush on my year 3 teacher. My mum's been super supportive all the way through my teenage years as well. But exploring my gender identity is more of a recent thing for me. It's sort of, I think it's just never really been the right time for me to ask those questions because I'm also neurodiverse. I'm autistic and I have ADHD, and I didn't know for a very long time. I was diagnosed when I was 25. And up until that point, I would say those things were affecting my identity in such a big way, but I didn't know what was going on. That only after I started to unpack that was I able to start asking other questions about my identity as well. And definitely being at Northcoders, this is the first place where I've felt open and comfortable discussing my gender identity too. So I would say for me, tech's actually been a positive experience, though I recognise that might not be universal across the board.
That's really interesting though. I think I had a conversation with Sam after we did the podcast the other week about how kind of as a queer person sometimes you feel like your development has kind of been pushed back a little bit by you kind of discovering different parts of your identity. So it's really interesting to hear you say that that's been kind of a thing that's progressed for you.
Yeah, definitely. It's something I've seen sort of within the autistic community as well. And there's also kind of a school of thought that sort of discusses how autism affects your experience of gender as well. I think that's definitely an impact for me on days when I'm feeling genderless. It's almost like I'm feeling autistic, and that's kind of taking over the how I feel on that day. So yeah, it's still quite fresh, and I haven't really fully developed my understanding of it yet. But it's definitely helpful being around other people who I can have these conversations with and ask, what's your experience like, and kind of.
Yeah, we were talking about that just before. Like it does surprise me a little bit. Because like there is that kind of like stereotype of like STEM and tech just being quite male dominated in general and like not very, I don't want to say not diverse, but not like queer diverse.
Yeah.
To the point where you come in and you kind of, again, it's like you were saying before, a bit of a bubble here, but it's definitely kind of almost like a safe space without explicitly calling it a safe space, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, what you're saying before, Eli, where there's definitely that feeling of you've kind of almost like hidden yourself for so long that once you start to rediscover yourself, it's kind of like you're sent back like 10 years in time almost.
Yeah.
And like all this kind of developing you should have done in your teenage years is just now suddenly here. Like, I don't know how it was for you, like coming out as trans, but I very specifically remember after I came out, it was not that I wanted to dress like a teenager, but I wanted to dress how I wanted to dress when I was a teenager.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, just without even realizing it, it's more kind of a feeling of not just accepting yourself, but accepting that that's okay to have about yourself. Because I think like to progress in any kind of identity, you do need to experiment quite a lot. And I think in non-queer spaces, you don't get that opportunity.
Yeah.
And I think that ties in a lot with not just like your identity, but also like your actual like personal development, like as a working person. If you're stuck for so long, kind of trying to figure out one thing, you really don't have time to find out what you want to do with the other things. So for me, I think it wasn't a case of I came into tech and found myself. It was more like I found myself and then came into tech because of it. Because I allowed myself to like understand that part of me, and I can now understand something else about myself.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, I know what you mean there. I guess I was just kind of thinking back to sort of my own childhood, and I think a big part of your formative identity, it comes from how other people perceive you as well, and there's a little bit of kind of unpacking and breaking down of that you need to do. So for me, when I was younger, I was always considered, a tomboy, and I'm not a girly girl, and those kind of things come along with, well, if you're a tomboy, you like these things and you do these things, and I guess when I was younger, I tried to fit myself into every single male interest possible. I would be like, I must love football and sport and computers and maths and anything that kind of fit that mold. And weirdly, sort of now that I'm at the point where I'm comfortable saying that there are days when my gender isn't female, on the days where I do feel female, I feel more free to explore that side of myself as well, and those more girly things. And it's not necessary to me that those things that even have to have anything to do with my identity. It can just be you feel like doing those things on the day.
Definitely.
Yeah, but you do kind of get you get told almost that these things are intrinsic, and it's almost like there's this thing inside of you you've got to discover. But, well, my experience of identity is it's very transient. It's not a fixed sort of feature of my reality.
Yeah, I think it's that kind of feeling of, it's like, yes, you're allowed to explore your gender as long as it's in these confines.
Yeah, definitely.
Definitely.
Like, I know, like, a big part of me coming out was just enjoying that I had more freedom to explore, like, my identity.
Yeah.
It wasn't even kind of like, ooh, I'm trans now. It was like, oh, I can be myself now. Yeah. I was like, I don't know what that is yet, but I can do it.
I suppose that's another sort of element of identity, is kind of performing that identity as well, I suppose.
No, I think for me personally, and this may just be a personal anecdote rather than anything that can be applied to anyone else, but I really feel like testosterone helped me to tap into kind of the Vulcan part of my brain, where I could actually understand logic and maths in a way that I hadn't previously, and I would hate for anyone to apply that anathema to the world. But for me personally, I never would have really considered coding as something that I would have done previously, but a set of circumstances, including COVID, brought me to that point where I was like, actually, this is something that I really want to pursue post transitioning and living in a kind of transient hospitality world for many years. So I think, you identity is very much bound to kind of what you do in your life.
Do you think that was more because you now weren't focusing on this issue and like you had a solution to that issue, it was now something else you could do? Or do you think it was more kind of like, because testosterone does, like, hormone changes, like having HRT is a crazy experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I know it definitely changed, like, my way of thinking. But again, I don't know if that was just because I wasn't thinking about something else now.
Well, no, it's a really valid question, and probably there should be some studies into it if the medical community cared enough to do so. But no, I think it was a combination. I think there was definitely a change in my attitude and my mindset, but also the other thing as well, definitely there was something that wasn't preoccupying me. I mean, I was someone who didn't realise they were transgender doing a master's in gender studies. Like, you know, talk about looking for self-discovery. So I think it's definitely a combination of the two. You know, I think hormones do have an impact on your mentality, but also once you strip back all of that other stuff that you're trying to work your way through, it's a lot easier to find a path that you actually want to go down.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's been interesting for me with coding, though, is so I've always been somebody whose skill base has been more sort of logical and mathsy and kind of systemic, I guess. But it's kind of, I think it's a bit of a false assumption about coding that it's all like that. I think it's hugely creative, it's hugely communicative, collaborative, and I think having a more diverse makeup of people working within code can help bring out some of those other sides and help to improve code and make it more robust and make it more user friendly. I think from my experience of studying computer science, it's much more focused on things like optimization, and it can be quite competitive, which I think tends to happen to a lot of male interests. They get told this must be competitive, and I don't like that approach because I think if you're thinking about the user, quite often the changes the user needs aren't anything to do with shaving off a few microseconds on a back-end process. It might be better to have a loading pattern that takes much longer to load than that optimization, but to the user it's like, oh, I can see something's going on there. So and I think bringing more diverse backgrounds into code brings more of these kind of out of the box ways of thinking
absolutely
to the table.
Yeah, I think I listened to another podcast recently about how impactful accessibility is on people using websites and buying products, and how people will just switch off from certain websites if they're not accessible. So I think there is such a broader range of experience that code should be applied to.
Yeah.
That it's not if you're just focusing on competition and speed and money.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting point though, because I think there is that like outside vision of something like coding just being very much like, oh, I need to know maths and science, and I need to have this kind of brain. But yeah, I really don't think there is enough being said about it being a creative outlet. And not even just in the way of, oh, I can make a really nice, interesting website. I can work with I can work with like 3D models and that kind of thing. I think genuinely, even something like backend, you know, it's not, you wouldn't put it in a museum. But when I'm working on stuff like backend, I definitely feel like it's a creative outlet for me. Even if it looks the same as someone else next to me.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like something like Lego, right? You follow the instructions, but it's still a creative process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I like the Lego analogy for code.
That's a very good analogy.
Yeah, it sort of feels like you have parts to code that you can slot together and you can sort of make it work the way that you want it to work.
Yeah, I think you hear about it more like in a coding environment. There is that thing of like, there's no one correct answer.
Yeah.
I think that's where like a lot of the creativity comes from. Like if you can, it like, you know, a lot of like testing is just, if I give it this, does it give me out this? And like everything in between that is completely up to you. And that's quite interesting to me. That, you know, someone like me who kind of has no previous experience, well, not no, but like a very tiny amount of coding experience previously, and you with a computer science degree, like if we tackled the same kind of problem, it would look probably quite different. And yeah, I don't think that's kind of chalked up enough in outside vision, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And I think you get that kind of, you can get emotional catharsis through it the same way you would other creative outlets as well. And you kind of get a bit emotionally attached to your code, I think, too, don't you? Like, you're like, I made that, I wrote that, I like the way that looks on the screen.
The green ticks help.
Yeah, just little things like, oh, you prefer the way an arrow function looks to a normal function declaration, and you're just like, yeah, this is my code, it's got my stamp on it now.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. Yeah, I never thought of it like that. Just like, yeah, like I don't know if I could like pick my code out of a line. But I'd like to think I would see the hallmarks of my code and probably the mistakes I personally make.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's interesting because I think we had a thing the other day where quite a few junior devs all solved the same problem and all looked at each other's code. I think you were both involved in that, yeah. And I thought that was so interesting because so many people had solutions that I would never have come up with, but still solved the exact same problem.
And it wasn't like a particularly complex problem either. No, it, like that. Yeah, that really surprised me as well. Just kind of seeing like how someone broke this, not even like coded it differently, but broke down the problem differently. And like that's all kind of coding really is, like break down the problem. You might break it down into different problems, and then we just go and solve that. And I think, yeah, that's really where like diversity plays a hugely important part in something like coding. You know, it's not just because it's a male-dominated field. And we need to get more diverse people into it. It's more just you literally are missing a whole other perspective on how to solve this problem, and it's not just how to get from A to B. It's how to get from A to Z and all the letters in between.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah, and also when you apply that problem to kind of a broader spectrum of problems, how that fits in with those and how it can influence how those bigger problems are solved as well.
Definitely. And then you sort of start using the same approach in like non-coding areas as well, that sort of method of breaking something down into little steps and kind of working through it. You know, I really like something like TDD for that, because when I try to do something with TDD, I try to just ignore the final solution and go, right, what's the most simple? Then what's next step? And then by the time you get to the last step, you've kind of written the code without even having to understand necessarily how you've got there. You've done it step by step. And I think that approach can be useful for sort of, well, for me, it's really useful for tasks I struggle with executive functioning difficulties with, like doing the washing and the washing up and things like that. If I can sort of break them down more algorithmically, it helps me to sometimes keep on top of those things.
How do you feel like
really
your
great analogy.
neurodiversity is actually affected, not just like how you code, but like your actual like coding progression?
I'm always hesitant to actually sort of link things to my neurodiversity, because the neurodiverse experience is as different from person to person as the neurotypical experience is.
Absolutely.
But in neurodiversity, we tend to see certain patterns towards, well, we call it spiky profiles, sort of towards extremes. And one of those areas in which we quite often have high functioning is things like logic and stuff like that. So what was really interesting for me with learning to code was just how relevant logic and philosophy have been. Getting that kind of conceptual understanding was a little bit easier for me, I think, than some of my cohort mates, because they hadn't spent 5 years having to think about all different questions in that kind of methodical way. So I would say it's potentially been an advantage, just because it fits in nicely with the way that my brain likes to think anyway. So, and also as a field, there is a disproportionately high number of us in employment, which is amazing, because we have horrendous employment levels. And so whilst I absolutely love the creative and collaborative sides of coding, it's nice that there is that side where you can sort of hide away from the world and just kind of code quietly for a few hours and have that personal space as well.
I think that's a really, really interesting point, and I am just kind of like going to segue a little bit here, but this was something I was thinking about before when I was, but what you're saying, like the tech industry has like an abnormally high level of neurodiverse employment. One thing I am super interested in is why trans people are so drawn to like STEM and tech in general. And I'm wondering, like, do you think maybe like there's some, because there is a large crossover of trans and neurodiversity, that just kind of is almost like linked in another way through that?
It potentially is, yeah, it probably is. I imagine there are lots of factors that contribute to the higher numbers, but that I would say that probably is one of them, because like you say, within the neurodiverse community, there are a disproportionate number of trans people as well. And that is where sort of the discussion from earlier about sort of how autism affects your gender identity and stuff sort of comes from, whether there's a link between being autistic and your experience of being in the world that sort of makes you maybe more comfortable with questioning I guess if you're already being othered for some reason, it's a little bit easier to question these other sort of areas in which you might be othered as well.
I've always wondered about it, because in my head, a lot of it, I don't even know it was for me, but I just seem to kind of think of it as coming out as trans is such like a self-love act that you kind of want to do the best for yourself. And I'm wondering if like maybe like something like STEM and tech, because it's so kind of highly, like you got really high levels of employment satisfaction, you got really high wages, and you just kind of see that and go, well, that sounds really good. Yeah. I should try that.
I think there maybe is something to that. So I guess earlier in my life, I was sort of just happy to just come out of uni, go into my admin job, just stay being an admin, be a mum, kind of didn't really like challenge myself career-wise, and I didn't really know how it would work either, having a full-time job around my son. But I can't remember at the end of my point now. Keep doing that. This is neurodiversity in action for you. Yeah, like it definitely sort of freed me up to kind of do that.
It's a really interesting conversation piece, though, I think, and potentially the basis for a thesis for someone to write. But no, I did sort of, when I was learning to code at the beginning and thinking about the Northcoders course, I did feel like there was sort of something that always kept drawing me back to trying to solve a problem, and I wonder if there's something about that that's kind of like that feeling of needing to finish something or needing to continue with something that is
that's a really good point, yeah.
Quite a draw to people in quite a specific way.
Yeah, definitely. It's definitely something that's suited for hyper focus as well, which is obviously really common for all different types of neurodiversity. And it's very rewarding. Things like testing, we always call it the green dopamine tick.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it does have that kind of positive impact on your well-being. It's a fun activity to do, and getting to do that for a job is sort of like, you feel kind of lucky in a way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think we've gone over pretty much everything we wanted to talk. Is there anything you wanted to bring up?
I can't think of anything.
Is there anything you would want to change about the tech industry in general, in regards to your personal, like, queer identity, neurodiverse identity, anything in those?
I think the biggest change I'd like to see is with younger people, for them to have access to the information they need about the industry, for the sort of generally perceived myths about the industry to be broken down, and for it to just be clear that there is a space for people like us here, and we are here, and we're ready to welcome you with open arms. That would be the biggest have the biggest impact, but obviously that's longer term, and there are things that we also need to be addressing right now, I think. But I'm not too sure what the solutions are, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't asking for solutions.
No,
don't worry.
yeah.
I personally think the solution is just conversations.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with coaching. You know, like, you don't get to see anything different unless you talk about it.
Yeah, definitely.
I think something like this podcast is maybe what needs to happen, just a lot more often and in bigger spaces, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. I think as much as I kind of like love systemized things, when it kind of comes to human interaction, I just think it's better to just talk to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's been lovely to talk to you, Maddie. Thank you so much for having this conversation with us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Join us again next time.